The stench of smoke hit her before anything else. Madeline Zimmer bolted awake in her bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as the crackle of flames filled her ears. The boarding house room was already hot, too hot, and the dim orange glow beneath her door told her everything she needed to know. Fire. And it was spreading fast. Superior, Arizona, 1879, a dusty mining town nestled between rugged mountains and endless sky, was experiencing one of the driest summers in memory. Madeline had only been in town for 3 weeks, but already she understood how quickly disaster could strike in such a place. She leaped from bed, yanking her cotton nightgown away from her body as sweat beaded on her skin. The heat was becoming unbearable, and as she reached for the door, she pulled back with a cry. The metal doorknob had nearly seared her palm. "Help!" she screamed, backing away. "Someone help me!" The crackling grew louder. Smoke began seeping through the cracks around the door frame, thin tendrils at first, then thicker plumes that made her cough and choke. Madeline grabbed the pitcher of water from her nightstand and doused a handkerchief, pressing it over her mouth and nose. She rushed to the window, her only other escape, and pushed hard against the wooden frame. It didn't budge. Heart racing, she tried again, putting her shoulder into it, but the window remained firmly shut. Someone had nailed it closed from the outside. "No, no, no," she whispered, panic rising in her chest. Who would do such a thing? Why would anyone want to trap her? The smoke was growing thicker now, making it hard to see, hard to breathe. Madeline began pounding on the window, screaming until her throat was raw. Outside, she could hear shouts, the chaos of people fleeing the burning building, but no one seemed to hear her cries. The fire was consuming the boarding house quickly. Too quickly. This was no accident. The blaze had been set deliberately, and whoever did it had made sure she couldn't escape. Madeline's mind raced through possibilities. Was it Jacob Thornton, the mine owner who'd threatened her just yesterday after she'd refused his advances? Or perhaps it was related to the ledger she'd discovered while working as a bookkeeper at the assayer's office, the one showing discrepancies in the silver shipments that suggested theft on a massive scale. A thunderous crack from the hallway told her the structure was beginning to fail. She had minutes, perhaps seconds. Through her tears and the thickening smoke, Madeline spotted movement outside, a tall figure on horseback galloping toward the building. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, his face obscured by a bandana as he assessed the burning structure. Nathan Quinn had been riding back to his small ranch outside of town when he saw the glow of the fire against the night sky. He'd pushed his stallion to a gallop, a sense of dread building in his gut. Fires in these parts could claim entire towns if not contained quickly. As he approached the boarding house, he saw townsfolk forming a bucket brigade, but the flames were already licking the roof. The building wouldn't last long. "Everyone out," he shouted to Sheriff Miller, who was directing the firefighting efforts. "Think so," the older man coughed, his face streaked with soot. "Mrs. Winters got most of the boarders out the front, but something didn't feel right." Nathan scanned the building, counting windows, remembering the layout from when he'd delivered lumber for repairs last month. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the window on the east side, second floor. Unlike the others, no flames were visible through it, just darkness. And then, for just a moment, he thought he saw a flash of movement. "Someone's still in there," he said, already moving toward the building. "Quinn, don't be a fool," the sheriff called after him. "That place is about to collapse." Nathan ignored him, tying his bandana over his nose and mouth as he circled the building. The heat was intense, singeing the hairs on his arms even from 20 feet away. As he reached the east side, he heard a faint pounding and a muffled cry from the second-floor window. "Hello, anybody up there?" he shouted. The pounding grew more frantic, and he caught a glimpse of a woman's face through the glass, panic evident in her wide eyes. "Stand back," he called, looking around frantically for something to break the window. Finding nothing suitable, he pulled his pistol from its holster, aimed carefully, and fired at the lower corner of the window. The glass cracked but didn't shatter. Inside, Madeline jumped at the sound of the gunshot, then realized what was happening. Hope surged through her as she waved frantically at her would-be rescuer. Nathan holstered his gun and ran to his horse, retrieving a lariat from his saddle. He fashioned a loop, swung it over his head, and hurled it at the window with all his might. The rope knocked against the glass, cracking it further but still not breaking through. "Damn it," he muttered, retrieving the rope. Time was running out. He could see the flames now visible in the adjacent windows. The building groaned ominously. Looking around desperately, he spotted a large rock near the base of the building. He hefted it, tested its weight, then hurled it with all his strength at the window. The glass shattered, sending shards flying inward. "I'm coming," he shouted to the woman, whose face reappeared amid the smoke, but the window was too high to reach from the ground. Nathan spotted a water barrel nearby, rolled it beneath the window, and climbed atop it. Even standing on his tiptoes, the window ledge remained a few feet above his outstretched fingers. "Jump," Madeline cried, coughing violently. "I cannot get out unless you break more of the window." Understanding immediately, Nathan jumped, catching the window frame with his hands. Ignoring the glass cutting into his palms, he pulled himself up enough to kick at the remaining glass with his boot, clearing the frame. "Give me your hand," he called, extending his arm into the smoke-filled room. Madeline stumbled forward, dizzy from the smoke. Her fingers brushed his, then slipped away as she collapsed to her knees, the handkerchief falling from her face. Nathan made a split-second decision. Bracing himself against the window frame, he hoisted his body through the opening, tumbling onto the floor beside her. The heat was suffocating, the smoke so thick he could barely see 2 feet ahead. "Come on," he said, lifting her into his arms. "We're getting out of here." Madeline tried to speak, but only managed a weak cough. Her eyes fluttered as consciousness began to slip away. Nathan carried her to the window, the only way out now that the hallway was engulfed in flames. He sat on the ledge, cradling her against his chest, and looked down at the hard ground below. It wasn't a deadly drop, but it wouldn't be pleasant either. "Hold on tight," he murmured, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. He pushed off, twisting his body in mid-air so that he would take the brunt of the impact. They hit the ground hard, Nathan grunting in pain as they rolled. For a moment he lay there, dazed. Madeline still clutched protectively in his arms. Then he was moving again, carrying her away from the building just as a thunderous crash announced the collapse of the second floor. Sparks and burning debris rained down around them as Nathan continued to put distance between them and the inferno. When they were finally safe, he gently laid her on the ground. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, pushing her soot-streaked hair away from her face. Madeline's eyes fluttered open, her vision slowly focusing on the man who had saved her life. Despite the dirt and sweat covering his features, she could see he was handsome, with intense blue eyes that reflected the orange glow of the fire. "You broke the window," she whispered, her voice raspy. "Every last one of them until I found you," he confirmed with a small smile. "I'm Nathan Quinn." "Madeline Zimmer," she replied, trying to sit up and wincing. "Easy now," he cautioned, supporting her back. "You breathed in a lot of smoke." Doc Simmons hurried over, his medical bag clutched in his gnarled hands. "Let me see her, Quinn," he ordered, kneeling beside Madeline. As the doctor examined her, Nathan stood and surveyed the burning building, now little more than a skeleton of charred timber. Something didn't add up. Fires happened, especially in the dry season, but the way the blaze had spread so quickly, and the fact that Madeline's window had been sealed shut. The window was nailed closed, Madeline said, as if reading his thoughts. Someone wanted me trapped in there. Nathan's eyes narrowed. You sure about that? She nodded, then dissolved into a fit of coughing. She needs rest and clean air, Doc Simmons announced, and those burns on her hands need tending. I'll take her to my place, Nathan offered, suddenly protective of this woman he'd just met. It's a couple miles outside town, away from all this smoke. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Probably for the best. Whoever tried to kill her might try again if she stays in town. Madeline's eyes widened at the blunt assessment. My things all gone, I'm afraid, the doctor said gently. The whole place is destroyed. Nathan helped her to her feet. Can you ride? Yes, she said, though uncertainty flickered across her face. Good. He whistled for his horse, which trotted over, remarkably calm despite the chaos. This is Rusty. He's steady as they come. He helped her onto the saddle, then swung up behind her, one arm securely around her waist. Hold on, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. As they rode away from the burning town, Madeline couldn't help but lean back against his solid chest. She was exhausted, frightened, and now homeless in a town where someone clearly wanted her dead. Yet somehow, with this stranger's strong arms around her, she felt safer than she had in weeks. Nathan guided Rusty through the darkness, acutely aware of the woman in his arms. Her body was warm and slight against his, her hair, despite the smoke, smelling faintly of lavender. He'd never been one for impulsive heroics, preferring to keep to himself on his small ranch. Yet something had drawn him to that window, something beyond basic human decency. Thank you, Madeline whispered as they rode beneath the star-filled Arizona sky, for breaking the window, for finding me. Nathan tightened his arm around her slightly. Just glad I was riding by when I was, he said simply. They continued in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as Superior burned behind them and an uncertain future lay ahead. The ride to Nathan's ranch took less than an hour, but to Madeline, it seemed both endless and too brief. Despite the circumstances, she found herself oddly comfortable in this stranger's embrace, his steady presence a balm to her frayed nerves. As they crested a small rise, Nathan's homestead came into view, a modest cabin with a small barn and corral, nestled against a backdrop of rugged hills. A dog began barking, announcing their arrival. That's just Patch, Nathan explained. He sounds fiercer than he is. True to his word, the dog that came bounding toward them was a motley creature with one black patch over his eye, his tail wagging so hard his entire body wiggled with excitement. Nathan dismounted first, then reached up to help Madeline down. Her legs buckled as her feet touched the ground, and he caught her, his hands steady on her waist. Sorry, she murmured, embarrassed by her weakness. I think it's all catching up with me. No need to apologize, he said, his voice gentle. You've been through hell tonight. He supported her as they walked to the cabin, Patch circling their legs enthusiastically. The interior was simple but clean, a main room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a small kitchen area. A doorway led to what she presumed was a bedroom. It's not much, Nathan said, suddenly self-conscious about his humble home. It's perfect, Madeline replied honestly. After nearly dying in a fire, a safe, quiet place was all she wanted. Nathan lit a lamp, casting a warm glow throughout the room. In the better light, he got his first clear look at her. Despite the soot and dishevelment, she was beautiful, honey-colored hair falling in waves to her shoulders, intelligent green eyes, and a delicate face with a strength that suggested she was no stranger to adversity. You're hurt, she said. breaking into his thoughts. She reached for his hands, turning them over to reveal the cuts from the broken glass. "It's nothing," he shrugged. "Not nothing," she insisted. "Do you have bandages?" He nodded toward a small cabinet. "Top shelf. But let's tend to you first." "I'm fine," she started to say, then swayed slightly on her feet. Nathan guided her to a chair. "Sit before you fall," he ordered gently. "I'll get some water for you to wash up, then you can have my bed for the night." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "I've slept on worse than a floor." Too exhausted to argue, Madeline nodded. She watched as he moved around the cabin with easy efficiency, heating water on the stove, gathering clean cloths and a small jar of salve. When he returned to her side with a basin of warm water, she dipped her hands in gratefully, wincing as it stung the minor burns on her palms. Nathan handed her a clean cloth, and she began wiping the soot from her face and arms. "Your nightgown's pretty much ruined," he observed, then cleared his throat awkwardly. "I can lend you one of my shirts to sleep in if you don't mind." Madeline blushed slightly, suddenly very aware that she was alone in a cabin with a man she'd just met, wearing nothing but a thin, soot-stained nightgown. Yet strangely, she felt no fear, only a surprising trust in this quiet cowboy who had risked his life to save hers. "That would be kind, thank you," she replied. He disappeared into the bedroom, returning moments later with a clean flannel shirt. "I'll step outside while you change," he said, heading toward the door. "Take your time." Once alone, Madeline quickly stripped off her ruined nightgown and used the cloth to wash as best she could. Nathan's shirt was comically large on her, the sleeves hanging well past her fingertips, but it was clean and soft against her tender skin. "Decent," she called when she was done. Nathan re-entered, carrying an armload of firewood. The night was warm, but he built a small fire anyway, explaining, "Smoke inhalation can cause chills. Best to keep it warm in here." As the flames flickered to life, Madeline found herself studying him more carefully. He moved with a quiet confidence, his lean frame suggesting strength without bulk. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that hinted at both laughter and hardship. Dark brown hair fell across his forehead, and a day's growth of beard shadowed his jaw. "Now let me see those hands," she said when he'd finished with the fire. To her surprise, he complied without argument, sitting beside her and extending his palms. The cuts weren't deep, but they were numerous, bits of glass still embedded in places. With gentle fingers, Madeline cleaned his wounds, carefully removing the glass fragments. "This might sting," she warned as she applied the salve. "I've had worse," he said, but she noticed the slight tension in his jaw. As she worked, she suddenly realized how intimate this moment was, her fingers caressing his calloused hands, their heads bent close together, the fire casting dancing shadows across their faces. A strange flutter awakened in her chest, catching her off guard. "How did you come to be in Superior?" Nathan asked, breaking the silence. The question brought Madeline back to reality with jarring force. Superior. The fire. Someone had tried to kill her. "I arrived 3 weeks ago," she explained, focusing on bandaging his hands to hide her sudden unease. "I took a position as a bookkeeper at the assayer's office." "Long way for a woman to travel alone for a bookkeeping job," he observed. Madeline hesitated. "I needed a fresh start," she said finally. "My father died last winter and there was nothing left for me in Boston." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Her father's death had been the catalyst, but it was the discovery of his massive gambling debts and the dangerous men who'd come to collect that had forced her to flee east for the territories. "I'm sorry about your father," Nathan said sincerely. "Thank you." She finished tying the last bandage. "There. Not as good as Doc Simmons would have done, but it should help. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither moved. Madeline felt a strange tightness in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Nathan cleared his throat and stood. "You must be exhausted. The bed's all yours." "What about you?" she asked. "I'll be fine out here," he assured her, already spreading a blanket on the floor near the fireplace. "Get some rest. We'll figure things out in the morning." Madeline wanted to protest, but found herself stifling a yawn instead. The events of the night were indeed catching up with her, her body aching and her mind foggy with fatigue. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn," she said softly, "for everything." "Nathan," he corrected. "And you're welcome, Miss Zimmer." "Madeline," she replied with a small smile. As she settled into his bed, surrounded by the unfamiliar scent of pine and leather that seemed to be uniquely his, Madeline's mind raced despite her exhaustion. Who had trapped her in that room? Why would anyone want her dead? And what would she do now, with everything she owned reduced to ashes? Through the open bedroom door, she could see Nathan settling on his makeshift bed, Patch curling up beside him. A strange man she'd known for mere hours, yet one who had already risked everything to save her life. With that thought warming her more than the blankets, Madeline finally surrendered to sleep. The gentle crackle of the fire and Nathan's steady breathing a surprising lullaby in this most unexpected sanctuary. Dawn broke over the Arizona landscape, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of pink and gold. Nathan had been up for hours already, unable to sleep well on the hard floor but mostly preoccupied with the woman in his bed and the attempt on her life. He tended to his morning chores quietly, feeding the chickens and his small herd of cattle, making sure Rusty had extra grain after the hard ride the night before. Now he stood on his porch, nursing a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise and turning possibilities over in his mind. The sound of the cabin door opening pulled him from his thoughts. Madeline stepped out, still wearing his shirt but having found a pair of his trousers, rolled up multiple times at the ankles and cinched tight at the waist with a piece of rope. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the pants. "I couldn't bear the thought of spending the day in just a shirt." "Not at all," he replied, trying not to stare at how the morning light caught in her hair or how unexpectedly appealing she looked in his clothes. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, a bit light-headed still," she admitted, "but alive thanks to you." Nathan handed her his coffee cup. "Here, it's strong." Their fingers brushed as she took it, sending an unexpected jolt through him. He'd lived alone for so long. The simple touch of another person, especially a beautiful woman, felt foreign and thrilling. "Thank you," she said, taking a sip and making a face. "You weren't exaggerating about the strength," he chuckled. "Sorry, I've been told my coffee could float a horseshoe." She took another sip anyway, seeming to appreciate the warmth if not the taste. "It's good, actually. Just potent." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the night's shadows. "I need to go back to town," Madeline said finally. "I need to find out who did this." Nathan frowned. "That might not be wise. Whoever tried to kill you thinks they succeeded. The moment you show your face in Superior, you'll be in danger again." "But all my possessions, my papers, are gone," he finished gently. "The boarding house is nothing but ashes now." She turned away, blinking rapidly. "Everything I brought from Boston, my mother's locket, my father's pocket watch, all gone." Nathan wished he could offer more comfort than awkward words. "I'm sorry, Madeline, truly." She nodded, composing herself. "It's not your fault, and you're right, it would be foolish to rush back." She turned to face him, her expression determined. "But I can't hide forever. Someone tried to murder me, and I need to know why." "Do you have any idea who might want you dead?" he asked. Madeline hesitated, and he could see her weighing how much to tell him. Trust didn't come easy in these parts, especially to a woman alone. There are possibilities, she said carefully. I've only been in Superior 3 weeks, but I've managed to make enemies already, it seems. Nathan leaned against the porch railing, his expression open and attentive. I'm listening if you want to talk about it. She studied him for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. 3 days ago, I was reviewing the ledgers at the assayer's office and found discrepancies. Silver shipments that didn't match the records, significant amounts missing. Theft, on a massive scale, she confirmed. At first I thought it might be simple error, but when I brought it to Mr. Hollister's attention, he's the head assayer, he became agitated, told me to forget what I'd seen. But you didn't, Nathan guessed. A small, rueful smile touched her lips. I've never been very good at looking the other way. I made notes, kept them in my room. I was planning to take them to the sheriff today. The notes that are now ash, Nathan concluded. Anyone else know about this? Just Hollister, as far as I know. But there's more. She sighed, running a hand through her tangled hair. Jacob Thornton, the mine owner, Nathan interrupted, his expression darkening. I know him. Not favorably, I take it. Let's just say Thornton and I have history, Nathan replied, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. What about him? He's been persistent in his attention since I arrived. 2 days ago, he cornered me after work, made it clear he expected me to accept his invitation to dinner. When I refused, he grabbed my arm, said I'd regret it. Nathan's jaw tightened. Sounds like Thornton, he muttered. Man's used to getting what he wants. He seemed the type, Madeline agreed. But would he go so far as to try to kill me for refusing his advances? Maybe. Or maybe it's related to what you found in those ledgers. Thornton owns the mines that feed the assayer's office. If silver's going missing, he could be behind it, she finished. The fire could have been meant to destroy the evidence and eliminate the witness in one stroke. Nathan nodded, impressed by her quick thinking. It's a solid theory. But it doesn't help us prove anything, she said frustratedly. The evidence is gone, and it's my word against theirs, a woman who's barely been in town a month versus established businessmen. We'll figure it out, Nathan assured her, surprising himself with the we. When had this become his problem too? But first, you need proper clothes and food. I've got eggs from the chickens, and I can probably find something in town that would fit you better than my things. You'd go back to town for me? She asked, touched. It's not a big deal, he shrugged. I go in for supplies regularly anyway. No one will think twice about it. But what will you tell people if they ask about me? Surely they've found out I'm missing by now. I'll say I haven't seen you, he said simply. Not exactly a lie, I haven't seen you in town. She smiled gratefully. Thank you, Nathan. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found me last night. The image of her trapped in that burning room flashed through his mind, making his stomach clench. Let's not think about that, he said gruffly. Come on inside. I'll make breakfast before I head out. As they walked back into the cabin, Patch trailing happily at their heels, Nathan wondered at the strange turn his solitary life had taken in just one night. For years, he'd kept to himself, avoiding complications and connections after the tragedies that had driven him west. Yet here he was, harboring a beautiful woman with dangerous enemies, feeling more alive than he had in longer than he cared to remember. It was reckless, potentially dangerous, and completely out of character for him. But as he watched Madeline moving about his kitchen, somehow making the space feel warmer and more like a home than it had in years, Nathan couldn't bring himself to regret it. While Nathan rode into town, Madeline busied herself around his cabin. She couldn't sit idle, not with her thoughts constantly returning to the fire and whoever had set it. Physical activity, even simple chores, helped calm her racing mind. She swept the floors, washed the breakfast dishes, and even attempted to mend a shirt she'd found with a torn sleeve. The domestic tasks felt comfortingly normal after the chaos of the previous night. As she worked, she explored the cabin more thoroughly. It was sparsely furnished but meticulously maintained. Nathan Quinn was clearly a man who valued order and simplicity. There were few personal items, a photograph of an older couple she assumed were his parents, a bookshelf with a surprisingly varied collection of literature, and a beautiful hand-carved chess set that looked well used. In the bedroom, she made the bed, smoothing the quilt and fluffing the pillow that still held the indentation of her head. On the bedside table sat a small leather-bound journal. Madeline paused, her hand hovering over it. Reading another person's private thoughts went against everything she'd been taught, but curiosity nagged at her. Just a peek, she told herself, carefully opening the journal to a random page. The handwriting was surprisingly elegant for a rancher, precise and flowing. She read a few lines. Second anniversary of their deaths today. The silence in this place grows heavier each year. Sometimes I wonder if coming west was running away or running toward something. Either way, I'm still running. Guilt washed over her, and she quickly closed the journal, replacing it exactly as she'd found it. Nathan clearly carried deep sorrows of his own, and she had no right to intrude on them. Outside, she explored the small but well-kept property. A vegetable garden grew behind the cabin, tomatoes and beans climbing on sturdy stakes. Chickens scratched contentedly in their pen, and a few cattle grazed in a pasture beyond. It wasn't a large operation, but it was productive and peaceful. Patch followed her everywhere, his mismatched ears perking up hopefully whenever she looked his way. "You're shameless," she told him, scratching behind those ears and earning an ecstatic wag in response. By midday, the sun was high and hot. Madeline retreated to the shade of the porch, settling into a handmade rocking chair. Despite the circumstances, she found herself oddly at peace in this place. Perhaps it was the simple relief of being alive, or perhaps it was something about Nathan Quinn himself, his quiet strength, his unassuming kindness. She wondered about his story. What had brought him to this remote patch of Arizona? Who were the people he'd lost, mentioned in his journal? And why did the mere thought of him make her heart beat a little faster? Madeline chided herself for such foolishness. She'd known the man barely a day. That she felt drawn to him was natural. He'd saved her life, after all. Gratitude could easily be mistaken for deeper feelings. Besides, she was in no position to contemplate romance. Not with unknown enemies seeking her death, not with her entire life reduced to ashes. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled her from her reverie. Patch leaped to his feet, barking excitedly. Madeline tensed, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was, alone at the isolated ranch. But it was Nathan who appeared over the rise, rusty loaded with supplies. Relief washed over her, followed by a warm flutter in her chest that she tried to ignore. "Any trouble in town?" She called as he approached. "Nothing serious," he replied, dismounting smoothly despite his bandaged hands. "Though there's plenty of talk about the fire." He began unloading packages from Rusty's saddlebags. "Got you some clothes. Had to guess at the size, but Mrs. Calloway at the general store was helpful." "You told her they were for me?" Madeline asked, alarmed. "Course not," he said. "Told her they were for my cousin who's visiting from back east. Lost her luggage on the journey." "Quick thinking," she said, impressed. "Also got you this," he added, pulling out a small revolver. "It's loaded. Do you know how to use it?" Madeline took the weapon, feeling its weight in her hand. "My father taught me. Said a woman on her own should know how to protect herself." "Smart man," Nathan nodded approvingly. "Keep it with you just in case." The gesture touched her deeply. Guns weren't cheap, and she knew he wasn't a wealthy man. "I'll pay you back for everything as soon as I can," she promised. "Don't worry about that now," he said dismissively. "Go try on the clothes while I put away the rest of the supplies." Madeline gathered the packages and headed inside. Mrs. Calloway, or more likely, Nathan, had chosen well. There was a practical brown skirt, 2 white blouses, undergarments which made her blush to think of him purchasing, and even a pair of sturdy boots that fit surprisingly well. When she emerged from the bedroom, properly dressed for the first time since the fire, Nathan was at the stove, preparing what smelled like beef stew. He turned at her entrance, and something in his expression made her breath catch. It wasn't leering or overtly appreciative, just a quiet approval that warmed her from within. "Better than my old clothes?" she asked, smoothing the skirt self-consciously. "Much," he said simply. "Though I'll admit, there was something about seeing you in my shirt." He trailed off, seeming surprised at his own words. A flush crept up his neck, and he quickly turned back to the stew. "Hope you're hungry. This will be ready soon." Madeline felt her own cheeks warm, pleased by his inadvertent compliment and charmed by his embarrassment. "Starving, actually," she admitted. "What news from town?" Nathan's expression grew serious as he stirred the pot. "They found a body in the ruins of the boarding house. Woman about your size, burned beyond recognition." Madeline gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Who?" "They don't know yet. Sheriff thinks it might be you, given that you're the only person unaccounted for." "That's horrible," she whispered. "Someone else died in my place." "Or," Nathan said carefully, "someone died to make people think it was you." The implication hung heavily between them. If the body was a deliberate plant, it meant whoever had tried to kill Madeline was covering their tracks, ensuring no one would look for her. "Did you hear anything about Hollister or Thornton?" she asked. "Thornton's making a big show of helping with the recovery efforts, donating money to those who lost everything. Hollister was at the assayer's office, business as usual." Nathan ladled stew into 2 bowls. "I did some asking around, casual-like. Seems there have been rumors about missing silver for months, but no one's been able to prove anything." They moved to the table, the serious conversation continuing over their meal. Madeline found herself relaxing into the domesticity of it, sharing food and conversation across a table, the simple comfort of human connection. "So what now?" she asked after they'd eaten. "I can't hide out here forever." "No," he agreed, "but we need to be smart about this. If they think you're dead, it gives us an advantage time to gather evidence without them watching their backs." "But what evidence? Everything I had is gone." Nathan leaned forward, his expression intent. "Maybe not everything. You said you found discrepancies in the ledgers." "Those are official records. There should be copies." Hope flickered in Madeline's chest. The territorial office in Tucson would have duplicates, she realized. They require monthly reports. "Exactly. And I'd bet Thornton and Hollister don't know that you know about those." She smiled, feeling a spark of optimism for the first time since the fire. "You're quite clever for a rancher, Mr. Quinn. And you're quite brave for a bookkeeper, Miss Zimmer," he returned with a small smile of his own. As the evening wore on, they formulated a plan. Nathan would ride to Tucson, a 2-day journey each way, to examine the territorial records. Madeline would remain at the ranch, staying out of sight. If he found evidence of the theft, they would take it directly to the U.S. Marshal, bypassing the local sheriff who might be in Thornton's pocket. "It's not ideal leaving you here alone," Nathan fretted as they cleaned up after dinner. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "I have Patch for company, and now this." She patted the revolver which she'd kept close all evening. "Besides, no one knows I'm alive, much less here." Nathan didn't look convinced. Just stay close to the cabin, don't go riding out or anything that might draw attention." "Yes, sir," she teased, saluting playfully. His serious expression broke into a reluctant smile. "I'm being overprotective, aren't I?" "A little," she admitted. "But it's nice, having someone care." Their eyes met, and that now familiar warmth spread through her chest. They stood barely an arm's length apart, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. For a moment, Madeline thought he might step closer, might touch her. Part of her, a growing, insistent part, hoped he would. Instead, Nathan cleared his throat and stepped back. "I should check on the livestock before dark," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Make yourself at home." As he walked out, Madeline released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This attraction between them was growing stronger, more difficult to ignore. Under different circumstances, she might have welcomed it, explored it. But with her life in danger and her future uncertain, romance seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. Still, as she watched him through the window, moving with easy confidence among his animals, she couldn't help wondering what it might be like to belong here with him. To wake each morning to his quiet strength, to share meals and conversation and more. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She barely knew Nathan Quinn, yet already he was becoming essential to her in ways that went far beyond gratitude for her rescue. When darkness fell and they prepared for sleep, he again, insisting she take the bed while he made do with blankets by the fire, Madeline found herself reluctant to part from his company. "Nathan," she said softly as she paused in the bedroom doorway. "Thank you. Not just for saving my life, but for everything since. For believing me, for helping me." In the firelight, his features seemed softer, the usual guardedness momentarily absent. "You don't need to thank me, Madeline. Nevertheless, I am grateful, and I'm glad it was you who found me." Something flickered in his eyes, a warmth, a longing that matched her own. "So am I," he said simply. With that, they bid each other good night, each retreating to their separate sleeping spaces, yet somehow feeling less alone than either had in a very long time. The next morning, Nathan prepared for his journey to Tucson. He packed lightly bedroll, provisions, his rifle, planning to ride hard and fast. "I should be back within 5 days," he told Madeline as he saddled Rusty. 6 at the most." "I'll be fine," she assured him, though the thought of being alone for nearly a week made her more uneasy than she wanted to admit. "There's plenty of food in the pantry, and eggs from the chickens. Keep the doors locked at night, and if you hear anyone approaching, hide and have the gun ready," she finished. "I remember." Nathan hesitated, looking as if there was more he wanted to say. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small knife in a leather sheath. "Keep this with you too," he said, pressing it into her hand. "It was my father's, blade still sharp." Madeline recognized the gesture for what it was, not just practical protection, but a token of trust. This knife clearly held sentimental value for him. "I'll take good care of it," she promised, tucking it into her pocket. He nodded, seeming satisfied. "I should get going if I want to make good distance today." Still, he lingered, his eyes searching hers. Impulsively, Madeline stepped forward and placed a gentle kiss on his cheek. "For luck," she explained, stepping back quickly, her cheeks flushed. Nathan looked momentarily stunned, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Well, now I'm certain to succeed," he said softly. With obvious reluctance, he mounted Rusty and tipped his hat to her. "Stay safe, Madeline." "You too, Nathan," she replied, watching as he rode away, Patch sitting faithfully at her feet. She stood there long after he'd disappeared from view, one hand absently touching the pocket that held his father's knife, the other reaching up to her lips, still tingling from the brief contact with his skin. The days stretched long without Nathan's presence. Madeline kept busy, tending the chickens and garden, exploring the bookshelves, even trying her hand at baking bread in the old iron stove. Patch proved to be excellent company, always ready for a game of fetch or to listen to her reading aloud from Nathan's books. By the third day, she'd settled into a routine, though she still startled at every unexpected sound and kept the revolver within reach at all times. She found herself watching the horizon frequently, hoping for the sight of Nathan returning, though she knew it was too soon. That afternoon, as she was hanging laundry on a line behind the cabin, Patch suddenly stood alert, his ears perked toward the road. A moment later, Madeline heard it too, the sound of approaching horses, more than one, her heart hammered in her chest. Nathan would be alone, and he wasn't due back yet. Whoever was coming, they weren't friendly visitors out for a social call, not to this isolated ranch. Abandoning the laundry, she hurried inside, grabbing the revolver and checking that it was loaded. Patch followed, growling low in his throat. "Quiet," she whispered, peering cautiously through the window. 3 riders appeared over the rise, rough-looking men she didn't recognize. They approached slowly, studying the property with the calculated assessment of predators. "Quinn," one of them called out. "You home?" "Just want a friendly word." Madeline's mind raced. They were looking for Nathan, not her. Perhaps they didn't know of her existence at all, but their manner suggested anything but friendly intentions. One of the men dismounted and approached the cabin, while the others circled toward the barn. Patch growled louder, and Madeline quieted him with a gentle hand. "Come on out, Quinn," the man called, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "Heard you might be harboring someone who should be dead." Madeline's blood ran cold. They knew. Somehow they knew she had survived the fire. But how? The answer came a moment later when a 4th rider appeared, the slim, elegantly dressed figure of Arthur Hollister, the head assayer. "Miss Zimmer," he called out, his cultivated voice carrying clearly. "I know you're in there. Your presence in Tucson was noted yesterday. Did you really think we wouldn't have eyes watching the territorial offices? Tucson." But that was impossible. She hadn't left the ranch, unless... Understanding dawned with sickening clarity. Nathan had been recognized in Tucson, and someone had sent word to Superior. These men had followed his trail back here, assuming she was with him. "We have no quarrel with you, my dear," Hollister continued. "Simply return what's mine and we can end this unpleasantness." What was his? Madeline had nothing of Hollister's except knowledge of his theft, knowledge that could send him to prison. The first man had reached the porch now. He tried the door, finding it locked. "No one home, boss," he called to Hollister. "Search the place," Hollister ordered. "She's here somewhere. And find those documents." The man drew his pistol and smashed the window beside the door, reaching through to unlock it from inside. Madeline backed away, her mind racing. She could hide, but they would surely find her. She could try to run, but where? The open land offered little concealment, and they had horses. Her only real option was to fight. As the door swung open, Madeline raised the revolver with steady hands. "Stop right there," she commanded, her voice remarkably calm despite her racing heart. The man froze, genuine surprise crossing his face. Clearly he hadn't expected a lone woman to put up resistance. Well, he sneered, recovering quickly. "Look what we have here, a little lady with a big gun." He took a step forward. "You know how to use that thing, sweetheart." In answer, Madeline shifted her aim and fired, the bullet splintering the doorframe inches from his head. He jumped back, swearing colorfully. "She's armed," he shouted to his companions. "Don't be foolish, Miss Zimmer," Hollister called. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. Come out peacefully, and I give you my word you won't be harmed." "Your word means nothing," she replied loudly. "I know what you've been doing with the silver shipments, Hollister. I have proof. It was a bluff. She had nothing concrete yet, but it was her only leverage. What proof? Hollister's voice had lost some of its smoothness. The fire destroyed everything. Not everything, she countered. I made copies. They're hidden where you'll never find them. There was a pause, then murmured conversation outside that she couldn't quite make out. The man at the door had backed onto the porch but still had his gun trained on her. Here's what's going to happen, Hollister said finally. You're going to come with us to retrieve these alleged copies. If they exist, perhaps we can come to an arrangement. If not, he let the implication hang. I'm not going anywhere with you, Madeline replied firmly. Leave now, or the next bullet won't miss. The standoff stretched for several tense moments. Madeline's arms were beginning to tire from holding the revolver steady, but she refused to show weakness. Suddenly, Patch, who had been quietly growling beside her, erupted into frenzied barking, racing toward the back door that Madeline had foolishly left unlocked. Too late, she realized her mistake. While she'd been focused on the men at the front, others had circled around. The back door burst open, and Madeline whirled to face the new threat, firing instinctively. The shot went wide as a burly man tackled her, sending them both crashing to the floor. The revolver skittered away across the wooden planks. Madeline fought like a wildcat, kicking and clawing, but her attacker outweighed her by at least 100 pounds. He pinned her easily, grinning down at her through tobacco-stained teeth. Got her, he called triumphantly. Excellent, Hollister said, entering through the front door, brushing invisible dust from his expensive coat. Bind her hands. We're taking her back to Superior. As the man roughly pulled Madeline to her feet, she made one last desperate move, reaching for the knife in her pocket, Nathan's father's knife. Her fingers had just closed around the handle when a sharp blow to the side of her head sent her world spinning into darkness. When Madeline regained consciousness, she was on horseback, her hands bound before her, her body secured to the saddle with rope. Her head throbbed where she'd been struck, and her mouth was dry as cotton. Welcome back, Hollister said, riding beside her. I was beginning to worry Thompson had hit you too hard. Madeline said nothing, taking stock of her situation. They were on a trail she didn't recognize, moving steadily through scrubby terrain. The sun was lower in the sky, suggesting several hours had passed. All 4 men were present, including Hollister, who looked incongruously refined in his city clothes and derby hat. Where are you taking me? She finally asked, her voice raspy. Why, back to Superior, of course, Hollister replied with false pleasantness. Mr. Thornton is most eager to speak with you. He was quite put out to learn you had survived our little arrangement. Arrangement, she repeated, though she already knew the answer. The fire, my dear. His smile didn't reach his eyes. A regrettable necessity after you became too curious about matters that didn't concern you. You murdered an innocent woman to cover your crimes, Madeline said, disgust evident in her tone. Hollister shrugged elegantly. Collateral damage. Though I admit, having another body to pass off as yours was a stroke of fortune. Poor Eliza was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Eliza, the name struck Madeline with horror. Eliza Johnson had been the boarding house maid, a quiet girl of no more than 20. To think she had died in Madeline's place. You're a monster, she whispered. I'm a businessman, he corrected. And you've become a liability to a very profitable enterprise. They rode in silence after that, Madeline's mind working furiously to find a way out of this predicament. She'd lost Nathan's knife during the struggle, and the revolver was likely still on the cabin floor. Even if she could somehow free herself from the ropes, she was outnumbered, unarmed, and in unfamiliar territory. Her only hope was Nathan. He would return to find his cabin ransacked and her missing. He would come looking for her, but would he find her in time? And even if he did, what could one man do against 4 armed adversaries? As dusk settled over the landscape, they made camp in a small canyon. The men built a fire and shared a bottle of whiskey while Madeline remained tied to a stunted tree, offered nothing but a canteen of water. "You won't get away with this," she told Hollister when he brought the water. "The territorial authorities are a 2-day ride away," he finished smoothly. "By the time anyone realizes something is amiss, the evidence will be long gone, and so will you." He studied her dispassionately. "It's a shame, really. You're quite beautiful and obviously intelligent. In another life, we might have been allies rather than adversaries." "I would never ally myself with a thief and murderer," she spat. His expression hardened. "Then you've sealed your fate. Sleep well, Miss Zimmer. It may be your last opportunity to do so." With that ominous pronouncement, he returned to the fire, leaving Madeline alone with her fears. She tested the ropes binding her wrists, finding them painfully tight. The knots at her back were equally secure. There would be no escape, at least not tonight. As the stars emerged overhead, Madeline found herself thinking of Nathan. Was he on his way back from Tucson now? What would he think when he found his home violated and her gone? Would he blame himself? The thought of causing him pain bothered her almost as much as her own predicament. In just a few days, he had become incredibly important to her. His quiet strength, his understated intelligence, the gentle way he looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice all of it, had slipped past her defenses with surprising ease. If these were to be her last hours, Madeline regretted that she would never have the chance to explore what might have grown between them. Never know the feel of his lips against hers, never wake in his arms, never build a life in that simple cabin that had already begun to feel like home. A single tear slid down her cheek, which she couldn't even wipe away with her bound hands. No, she told herself firmly, this was not how her story would end. Somehow she would survive this. Somehow she would see Nathan again. With that determination burning in her heart, Madeline settled against the tree trunk, conserving her strength for whatever opportunity might arise. She would need every ounce of courage and cunning to escape what awaited her in Superior. Nathan urged Rusty to a faster pace as he crested the final rise before his ranch came into view. He'd ridden hard from Tucson, cutting a day off his expected return journey, driven by both his discoveries and an inexplicable sense of urgency. In his saddlebag were copies of the assayer's report's official documents that clearly showed the discrepancies Madeline had mentioned. Someone was indeed stealing silver on a massive scale, and the territorial records pointed squarely at Hollister and Thornton. But more alarming was what he'd overheard in a Tucson saloon, men talking about a woman who should have died in a fire, and how Thornton was offering good money to anyone who found her. Word had spread faster than Nathan had anticipated. He only hoped he'd made it back before trouble found Madeline. As the cabin came into view, Nathan knew immediately that something was wrong. The front door stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Patch, who should have run out barking to greet him, was nowhere to be seen. Drawing his pistol, Nathan approached cautiously, scanning the area for any sign of ambush. The property seemed deserted, but the signs of violence were evident: a shattered window, furniture overturned inside, a single spent shell casing on the floor. "Madeline," he called, knowing already that she wouldn't answer. A low whine came from the bedroom. Nathan found Patch lying on the floor, a gash on his flank but otherwise alive. The dog struggled to his feet at the sight of his master, tail wagging weakly. "Good boy," Nathan murmured, quickly examining the wound. It wasn't deep a graze rather than a stab. Someone had tried to silence the dog but hadn't been thorough about it. "You did your best, didn't you?" After tending to Patch's injury, Nathan systematically searched the cabin for clues. The revolver he'd given Madeline lay beneath an overturned chair. Signs of a struggle were evident throughout the main room. Outside, multiple hoofprints told the story of several riders approaching, and then departing with an additional horse that hadn't been there on arrival. They had taken her then. But where? Back to Superior seemed most likely, given what he now knew about Hollister and Thornton's operation. The question was whether Madeline was still alive. The absence of blood in the cabin gave him hope, but he knew these men weren't known for their mercy. Time was critical. Nathan quickly gathered fresh supplies, reloaded his weapons, and tended to Rusty, who was exhausted from the hard ride from Tucson. As much as it pained him, he would need to take his backup horse, a sturdy paint named Scout, leaving Rusty to recover. "Stay, Patch," he ordered as the injured dog tried to follow him. "Guard the place. I'll bring her back." As he rode out, following the clear trail left by Madeline's captors, Nathan's mind churned with fear and determination. In just a few days, this woman had awakened something in him he'd thought long dead, a capacity for connection, for caring, for hope. The thought of losing her now, when they'd barely begun to explore what might be between them, was unbearable. But more than his own feelings, it was Madeline herself who drove him forward. Her intelligence, her courage, her resilience in the face of danger. She deserved to live, to thrive, to have all the opportunities that these men would steal from her. The trail led southwest, not directly toward Superior, but on a more circuitous route. Smart, they were avoiding the main roads where they might be seen with a captive woman. But it also meant they were moving slower, giving Nathan a chance to catch up. He rode through the night, stopping only when necessary to rest Scout and check the trail. By dawn, he estimated he was gaining on them. They had camped for the night. He'd found the remains of their fire and clear signs of their presence while he had pushed on. As the sun climbed higher, the terrain grew more rugged, with rocky outcroppings and deeper ravines. Nathan moved more cautiously now, aware that he was closing the gap. The last thing he wanted was to stumble directly into their camp without a plan. Around midday, he spotted them in the distance, 4 riders and Madeline, her hands bound before her, her head hanging with what might be exhaustion or despair. The sight of her, alive but clearly a prisoner, filled him with equal parts relief and rage. Nathan dismounted, tethering Scout in a sheltered spot, and proceeded on foot, keeping to high ground and using the terrain for cover. He needed to get closer, to assess the situation fully before making his move. They had stopped at a small stream, allowing the horses to drink. Madeline remained mounted, still bound, while the men stretched their legs. Nathan recognized Hollister immediately, his city clothes and dandified appearance making him stand out among the rougher men. The others were clearly hired guns, dangerous and alert. Nathan considered his options. A direct confrontation was suicide. 4 against 1 were bad odds, especially when they had Madeline as leverage. He needed to even the playing field somehow, or better yet, avoid a fight entirely. His opportunity came as they prepared to move on. One of the men, the largest and most brutish-looking, was assigned to ride ahead as a scout. Nathan watched as he separated from the group, following the stream up toward a narrow pass. Moving swiftly and silently, Nathan circled around to intercept the scout. He positioned himself behind a large boulder at a bend in the trail, waiting with the patience of a hunter. As the man approached, Nathan stepped out suddenly, his rifle aimed squarely at the man's chest. "Not a sound," he warned quietly. "Hands where I can see them." The scout froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Quinn," he growled in recognition. "Thornton said you might show up. Dismount." Slowly, Nathan ordered, ignoring the comment. The man complied, eyes never leaving the rifle. "You're making a mistake," he said. "There's 3 more behind me." "You can't take us all." "Maybe not," Nathan agreed, "but I can sure as hell take you." Before the man could respond, Nathan struck him hard with the rifle butt, catching him just below the ear. The scout crumpled unconsciously to the ground. Working quickly, Nathan bound and gagged him, dragging his body off the trail and concealing it behind the boulder. Taking the man's hat and bandana, Nathan mounted his horse and continued along the trail, head down and posture mimicking the scout's as best he could. It wasn't a perfect disguise, but at a distance, with the sun behind him, it might buy him the element of surprise. The plan worked better than he dared hope. As he approached the group, Hollister called out, "See anything ahead, Thompson?" Nathan didn't respond, continuing forward at a steady pace. He was within 30 yards before one of the other men noticed something amiss. "That ain't Thompson," he said, reaching for his gun. Nathan dropped the pretense, raising his rifle and firing in one fluid motion. The man clutched his shoulder, his pistol falling unfired as he tumbled from his horse. Chaos erupted. The remaining hired gun drew and fired wildly, missing Nathan but spooking the horses. Hollister grabbed for Madeline, trying to use her as a shield, but her mount reared, throwing them both to the ground. Nathan abandoned the rifle, now empty, and drew his pistol as he urged his borrowed horse forward. The hired gun took aim again, but Nathan was faster, his shot catching the man in the chest and sending him sprawling. Hollister had regained his feet and was dragging Madeline up by her bound arms. He pulled his own small pistol, pressing it to her temple. "Stop right there, Quinn," he ordered, his refined voice tight with fear and anger. "Drop your weapon or I'll kill her." Nathan reined in, his pistol still trained on Hollister. Madeline's eyes met his, wide with fear but also with a fierce determination. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a trust that transcended words. "Let her go, Hollister," Nathan said calmly. "It's over. I have the proof of what you and Thornton have been doing. The territorial authorities already know." "You're bluffing," Hollister snarled, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Am I?" Nathan reached slowly into his vest pocket, extracting a folded document. "This is a copy of the assayer's report you filed with the territorial office, the one that doesn't match what you recorded locally. The one that shows just how much silver you've been skimming." Hollister's grip on Madeline tightened. "Even if that's true, you'll never make it back to Tucson alive, not with Thornton's men searching every trail." "Who said anything about Tucson?" Nathan replied. "I've already been there. Those papers are on their way to the U.S. Marshal's office in Santa Fe as we speak." It was another bluff, but a calculated one. Nathan watched as doubt and fear warred on Hollister's face. The man was no hardened criminal, he was an opportunist, a white-collar thief who'd gotten in over his head. Madeline, sensing Hollister's uncertainty, chose that moment to act. She suddenly went limp, as if fainting, causing Hollister to momentarily shift his attention and loosen his grip. In that split second, she drove her elbow hard into his ribs and twisted away. Nathan fired, his bullet grazing Hollister's arm and causing him to drop his pistol with a cry of pain. Before the man could recover, Nathan was off his horse and tackling him to the ground, driving a hard fist into his jaw and rendering him unconscious. Breathing hard, Nathan turned to Madeline, who stood watching with an expression of stunned relief. In 2 strides, he reached her, pulling her into his arms and holding her tightly against his chest. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "No," she said against his shoulder. "Just scared, and so glad to see you." He pulled back enough to look at her, his hands gently cradling her face, Her skin was smudged with dirt, her hair tangled, but she had never looked more beautiful to him. "I thought I might be too late," he admitted, his thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. "You have excellent timing, Mr. Quinn," she replied with a tremulous smile. "Though next time, perhaps a bit earlier." Despite everything, Nathan found himself laughing. This remarkable woman who had faced death and captivity still had the spirit to joke about it. "I'll work on that," he promised. Then, because he couldn't wait any longer, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss at first, tender with relief and newfound hope. But as Madeline responded, rising on her toes to press closer, it deepened into something more: a promise, a beginning, a confirmation of feelings that had been building since he'd first broken that window to find her in the smoke. When they finally parted, both breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably untie you," he murmured. "That would be appreciated," she agreed, a hint of laughter in her voice. As he worked at the knots binding her wrists, Nathan explained what he'd discovered in Tucson: how Hollister had been falsifying records for months, allowing Thornton to skim silver from shipments and sell it privately, bypassing taxes and regulation. "They were stealing from the territorial government," he concluded. "That makes it a federal crime. They'll go away for a long time." "If we can prove it," Madeline reminded him, rubbing her chafed wrists as they finally came free. "And if we survive long enough to testify." Nathan nodded grimly. "First things first. We need to secure these men and get back to Superior before Thornton realizes his plan has failed." Working together, they bound Hollister and the wounded hired gun, collected the scout's unconscious form, and secured all three men to their horses. The man Nathan had shot in the chest was beyond help, his body left covered by his own coat. By late afternoon, they were riding toward Superior, their prisoners in tow, the evidence of Thornton's crimes safely tucked in Nathan's saddlebag. They traveled warily, alert for any sign of Thornton's men, but the trails remained clear. As they rode, Madeline told Nathan about her capture and the revelations from Hollister, including the identity of the woman who had died in the fire. "Poor Eliza," she said sadly. "She was always kind to me. To think she died because of something I discovered." "That's on Hollister and Thornton," Nathan said firmly. "Not you. You were doing what was right." She nodded, though the guilt would not be so easily dismissed. "What will happen when we reach Superior? Thornton has influence there." "The sheriff may be in his pocket," Nathan agreed. "That's why we're not going to the sheriff. We're going straight to the telegraph office. My friend Marcus runs it, and he's no friend of Thornton's. We'll get a message to the U.S. Marshal in Tucson immediately. And in the meantime, we'll have a little chat with Mr. Thornton." Nathan's expression hardened. "I think he'll find his position has suddenly become very precarious." As the sun began to set, the lights of Superior appeared in the distance. The town seemed peaceful, unaware of the drama about to unfold. Nathan and Madeline exchanged a look of determination as they urged their tired mounts forward. The final confrontation was at hand. Superior appeared unchanged as they rode down the main street, their bound prisoners attracting curious stares. News of their approach spread quickly, and by the time they reached the telegraph office, a small crowd had gathered. Marcus, a thin man with spectacles and a perpetual ink stain on his fingers, met them at the door, his eyes widening at the sight of Hollister trussed up like a holiday turkey. "Nathan Quinn, what in tarnation? Need to send a wire, Marcus," Nathan interrupted. "Urgent. To the U.S. Marshal in Tucson." Understanding dawned in the telegrapher's eyes. Come in," he said, ushering them inside and closing the door on the curious onlookers. While Nathan dictated a message detailing the silver theft and attempted murder, Madeline kept watch through the window. She spotted Sheriff Miller approaching, his expression thunderous. "We have company," she warned as the sheriff pounded on the door. "Let me handle this," Nathan said, positioning himself between Madeline and the entrance as Marcus reluctantly opened the door. "Quinn," Miller growled, his hand resting on his pistol. "What's the meaning of this? I've got reports you're dragging Hollister through town like a common criminal." "That's because he is one," Nathan replied evenly. "Him and Thornton both. I've got evidence of silver theft and attempted murder." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Evidence? What evidence?" Nathan held up the documents from Tucson. Official records showing discrepancies in the assayer's reports, and 3 men ready to testify that Hollister and Thornton tried to kill Miss Zimmer to cover it up. Miller's gaze shifted to Madeline, genuine surprise crossing his features. "Miss Zimmer? But you died in the fire." "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," she replied dryly, "and deliberately fabricated by these men." The sheriff seemed genuinely taken aback. "That's a serious accusation." "Which is why I've just sent for the U.S. Marshal," Nathan said. "This is federal jurisdiction now, Sheriff." A tense silence followed as Miller weighed his options. His relationship with Thornton was well known, but so was his fundamental honesty. Finally, he sighed heavily. "All right, Quinn. I'll take custody of Hollister and his men until the marshal arrives." His hand moved from his pistol to his badge. "But this better not be some kind of personal vendetta." "It's not," Madeline interjected. "I found the discrepancies in the ledgers myself. That's why they tried to kill me." Miller studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you, miss, but Thornton won't go down without a fight. He's waiting at his office now, demanding I bring you in." "Then let's not keep him waiting," Nathan suggested grimly. "I think it's time Mr. Thornton and I had a long, overdue conversation." Despite protests from both Miller and Madeline, Nathan insisted on confronting Thornton immediately, before the mine owner could organize resistance or escape. "I'm coming with you," Madeline declared, her tone brooking no argument. "He tried to have me killed. I deserve to look him in the eye." Nathan wanted to refuse to keep her safe, but the determination in her expression told him it would be futile. Besides, he admitted to himself he'd feel better having her where he could protect her. "Stay close to me," he conceded. "And if anything happens, it won't," she said with more confidence than she felt. "We have the truth on our side." Sheriff Miller led the way to Thornton's office, a grand building that stood in stark contrast to the modest businesses surrounding it. 2 armed guards stood at the entrance, evidence of Thornton's growing paranoia. "The sheriff to see Mr. Thornton," Miller announced authoritatively. "With guests." The guards exchanged glances but stepped aside, clearly recognizing Miller's authority even if they were on Thornton's payroll. Inside, Jacob Thornton sat behind an imposing desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand and a thunderous expression on his face. He was a large man, expensively dressed, with the florid complexion of someone who enjoyed too much rich food and alcohol. "Miller, finally," he began, then stopped short as he registered who accompanied the sheriff. "Quinn," he spat, his face darkening further. Then his gaze fell on Madeline, and genuine shock replaced his anger. "Impossible," he whispered. "Not impossible, just inconvenient for you," Nathan replied coldly. "Your plan failed, Thornton. We know everything about the silver theft and we have proof." "I don't know what you're talking about," Thornton blustered, but his eyes darted nervously to a locked cabinet behind his desk. "Your associate Hollister was quite talkative once we apprehended him," Madeline said, stepping forward. "Especially about how you ordered him to ensure I died in that fire." Thornton's gaze hardened. Hollister is a fool who acted on his own. If he implicated me, it's his word against mine. And who do you think people will believe? A respected businessman or a thieving clerk? They'll believe the territorial records, Nathan countered, placing the documents on Thornton's desk. And the U.S. Marshal, who is on his way from Tucson as we speak. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Thornton's face. He glanced at Sheriff Miller, perhaps hoping for support, but the lawman's expression remained impassive. "This is absurd," Thornton declared, standing abruptly. "I won't stand for these baseless accusations. Miller, arrest these two for slander and trespassing." "Can't do that, Jacob," Miller replied steadily. "There's too much evidence pointing your way, and frankly, I don't much care for men who burn down buildings with people inside." Thornton's face contorted with rage. In a sudden movement, he yanked open a desk drawer and pulled out a derringer, aiming it directly at Madeline. "You should have died in that fire," he snarled. Nathan moved faster than thought, shoving Madeline aside as the small pistol discharged with a deafening crack in the confined space. He felt a burning sensation across his ribs but remained standing, drawing his own weapon in one fluid motion. Before he could fire, Sheriff Miller had his pistol trained on Thornton. "Drop it, Jacob," he ordered. "Don't make this worse than it already is." For a moment it seemed Thornton might refuse, might force them to kill him rather than face justice. Then, with a defeated slump of his shoulders, he lowered the derringer to the desk. "You've ruined me, Quinn," he said bitterly. "You ruined yourself," Nathan replied, holstering his pistol and turning to check on Madeline, who had scrambled back to her feet. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she assured him, then gasped as she noticed the spreading stain on his shirt. "Nathan, you're bleeding." He glanced down, grimacing. "Just a graze. I've had worse shaving." Sheriff Miller had secured Thornton and was already calling for his deputy. "Get Doc Simmons," he instructed the young man who appeared. "Quinn's been shot." Despite Nathan's protests that the wound was minor, they insisted he see the doctor. As they exited Thornton's office, news of what had transpired was already spreading through town. People gathered on the boardwalks, watching with a mixture of curiosity and concern as Sheriff Miller escorted the once powerful mine owner to the jail. Doc Simmons confirmed Nathan's assessment the bullet had indeed only grazed his side, requiring cleaning and bandaging but nothing more serious. Throughout the examination, Madeline refused to leave his side, her face pale with concern. "You could have been killed," she said quietly as the doctor applied a bandage. "So could you," he pointed out. "Seemed like a fair trade." She shook her head, tears threatening. "Nothing about that would have been fair." The doctor cleared his throat pointedly. "He'll be fine, Miss Zimmer. Our Mr. Quinn is uncommonly difficult to kill." He patted Nathan's shoulder. "Just try not to pull those stitches for a few days." Once they were alone in the doctor's examination room, Madeline finally allowed herself to release the fear and tension that had sustained her through the confrontation. Tears flowed freely as Nathan pulled her into his arms, mindful of his bandaged side. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "We're safe now." "I was so afraid," she confessed, her voice muffled against his chest. "Not just for myself, but for you when he pulled that gun." "But he missed," Nathan reminded her gently. "And now he'll pay for his crimes, both of them will." She pulled back enough to look up at him, her tear-streaked face solemn. "What happens now? With us, I mean." It was the question that had been hovering between them, unasked but ever present. In the few days they'd known each other, their lives had become irrevocably intertwined. The connection between them was undeniable, but where it might lead remained uncertain. Nathan brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch infinitely tender. "Well," he said slowly, "I was thinking you might need a place to stay while you sort things out." My cabin's a bit rough, but it's quiet, good for healing. Just until I sort things out, she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. A slow smile spread across his face. Or longer, much longer if you want. His expression grew serious. I know it's fast, Madeline. We've only known each other a few days, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life without even knowing it. The simple honesty of his words touched her deeply. I feel the same way, she admitted. When I came west, I was running away from my past. I never expected to find someone I'd want to run toward. Nathan's heart swelled at her words. He'd been alone for so long, had convinced himself he preferred it that way. But in just a few days, this remarkable woman had shattered those defenses, awakening feelings he'd thought long buried. So you'll come back to the ranch with me? He asked, trying and failing to keep the hope from his voice. Yes, she said simply. Though I should warn you, I'm a terrible cook. Nathan laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Fortunately, I'm not. We'll manage. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed the promise between them, not just of the immediate future, but of all the possibilities that lay ahead. The U.S. Marshal arrived the following day, taking custody of both Thornton and Hollister. The evidence against them was overwhelming, especially after one of the hired guns agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. The two men would face trial in Tucson, charged with theft of federal property and attempted murder. As for Madeline, she found herself something of a local hero. The townspeople, many of whom had lost money or livelihoods due to Thornton's corrupt practices, treated her with newfound respect and gratitude. The new owner of the assayer's office, Hollister's former assistant, an honest man named Davis, offered her position back with a substantial increase in salary. It was a tempting offer, but as she and Nathan prepared to leave town, Madeline knew her path lay elsewhere. The little ranch outside Superior had already become more of a home to her than any place she'd lived since her father's death. You could take the job, Nathan said as they mounted their horses. I wouldn't mind the ride into town to see you. She shook her head, smiling. I appreciate the offer, but I think I'd rather help you with the ranch. I'm surprisingly good with chickens, it turns out. His answering grin was worth more than any salary. Patch will be glad to hear it. He's been inconsolable without you. As they rode out of Superior, side by side under the vast Arizona sky, Madeline felt a profound sense of rightness. The fire that had nearly claimed her life had instead forged something new and precious, a connection with this quiet, steadfast man who had broken every window until he found her. What are you thinking? Nathan asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best, she replied honestly. If not for that fire, we might never have met. I'd like to think we would have found each other eventually, he said. Some things are just meant to be. Madeline had never been one for fatalism or destiny, but looking at Nathan, at the future they might build together, she found herself wanting to believe. Perhaps some connections were indeed written in the stars, waiting only for the right moment to be discovered. As the little ranch came into view, Patch barking joyfully at their approach, Madeline knew she had found not just safety or shelter, but something far more precious, a place to belong, a person to love, a future bright with promise. Nathan reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. Welcome home, he said simply, and in those two words Madeline found everything she had ever sought and much she had never dared to dream of. 1 year later, the wedding was small but joyful, held in the shade of the cottonwood trees behind Nathan's, now their expanded cabin. Friends from Superior and neighboring ranches gathered to witness the union of Nathan Quinn and Madeline Zimmer, a couple whose dramatic beginnings had become something of a local legend. Madeline stood beneath an arch of wildflowers, wearing a simple white dress that Nathan's neighbor Mrs. Abernathy had helped her make. At her throat hung her mother's locket, a replacement found by Nathan after months of secretly searching through jewelry shops across the territory. It wasn't the original, but the thoughtfulness behind the gesture had moved her to tears when he presented it on her birthday. Nathan waited for her, uncharacteristically nervous in his best suit, Patch sitting dutifully at his side with the rings secured to his collar. The dog had recovered fully from his injury during the abduction and had appointed himself Madeline's permanent guardian, rarely leaving her side. As Madeline walked toward him, accompanied by the soft strains of a fiddle, Nathan felt his heart swell with love and gratitude. The past year had been the happiest of his life. Together, they had expanded the ranch, adding more cattle and improving the cabin. Madeline had proven herself not just a skilled bookkeeper, but a natural rancher, her city background belied by her enthusiasm for the work and her quick learning. They had watched as Thornton and Hollister were convicted and sentenced to lengthy terms in the territorial prison. Justice had been served, allowing them to build their life together without looking over their shoulders. Taking Madeline's hands in his as she reached him, Nathan marveled at how perfectly she fit into his life, as if there had always been a Madeline-shaped space waiting to be filled. "You look beautiful," he whispered as the preacher began the ceremony. "You don't look so bad yourself, Cowboy," she whispered back, her green eyes sparkling with happiness. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises not just of love and fidelity but of partnership and respect, of building a life that honored both their strengths. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause. Patch barked enthusiastically, circling the newlyweds with obvious approval. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with food and music and laughter under the stars. It was a far cry from the society weddings Madeline had attended in Boston, but infinitely more meaningful. As night fell and the last guests departed, Nathan and Madeline stood on their porch, his arm around her waist, watching the moon rise over their land. "Happy Mrs. Quinn?" he asked, still savoring the sound of her new name. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she confirmed, leaning into his embrace. "Though I do have something to tell you." There was a hint of nervousness in her voice that made him turn to face her. "What is it?" Madeline took his hand and gently placed it on her stomach. "We may need to add another bedroom to the cabin," she said softly. "In about 7 months." Nathan stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly, then all at once. "A baby," he whispered, awe and joy mingling in his voice. "We're having a baby," she nodded, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. "Doc Simmons confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to wait until today to tell you. A wedding gift." With a whoop of joy that probably startled the cattle in the distant pasture, Nathan lifted her into his arms, spinning her around on the porch before remembering her condition and carefully setting her down. "Sorry," he said, though his grin belied any real contrition. A father. I'm going to be a father." "And you'll be a wonderful one," Madeline assured him, touching his cheek tenderly. Later that night, as they lay in bed together, Nathan's hand resting protectively over the place where their child grew, Madeline reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. "You ever think about how close we came to never having this?" she asked quietly. "If you hadn't seen the fire that night, if you hadn't broken that window." Nathan tightened his arm around her. "I try not to," he admitted. "The thought of losing you before I'd even found you." He shook his head. "But maybe that's why I was so determined. Maybe some part of me already knew what you would mean to me." Madeline smiled in the darkness. My heroic cowboy breaking windows to rescue damsels in distress. Just the one damsel, he corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. The only one who matters. As they drifted toward sleep, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of their ranch at night, both felt the same profound gratitude for second chances, for courage in the face of danger, and most of all, for the love that had blossomed from the ashes of what might have been tragedy. 6 months later, spring had come to the Arizona Territory, painting the landscape with wildflowers and fresh green growth. The ranch had thrived under Nathan and Madeline's care, expanding to include new pastureland and a small orchard of apple trees that Nathan had planted as a surprise for his pregnant wife. Madeline sat in a rocking chair on the porch, her hand resting on her rounded belly, watching as Nathan worked with a young colt in the corral. Patch dozed at her feet, his role as protector now extended to include the unborn child whom he seemed to sense was imminent. The changes in their lives over the past year and a half sometimes still amazed her. From near death in a burning building to this peaceful domestic scene, it was a transformation she could never have predicted when she first arrived in Superior. Their cabin had grown along with their fortunes. Nathan had added 2 bedrooms, one for themselves and one for the baby, as well as expanding the main living area to create a proper dining room where they now hosted regular dinners for friends. Madeline's touch was evident in the cheerful curtains, the bookshelves filled with volumes from both their collections, and the chess set prominently displayed on a table by the window, where they played almost every evening. A letter from Tucson had arrived that morning, bringing news that Jacob Thornton had died in prison, not from violence, but from the slow deterioration of a man accustomed to power and luxury, suddenly deprived of both. Hollister, meanwhile, had found religion behind bars, writing lengthy letters of apology to those he had wronged, including Madeline. She had read his most recent missive with a mixture of skepticism and pity, eventually deciding that forgiveness while not forgetting was the path forward. As Nathan finished with the colt and walked toward the house, wiping sweat from his brow, Madeline felt the now familiar flutter of movement within her. She smiled, placing both hands on her belly to feel their child's acrobatics. Active today? Nathan asked, climbing the porch steps and kneeling beside her chair. Very, she confirmed. I think he's practicing to be a cowboy already. Or she might be practicing to be a scholar like her mama, he countered, placing his hand alongside hers. They had chosen not to guess the baby's gender, preferring to be surprised. The baby kicked against Nathan's palm, earning a delighted laugh from the soon-to-be father. Strong, whatever they are, he observed proudly. Doc Simmons says another month at most, Madeline said, a mixture of excitement and apprehension in her voice. Are we ready? Nathan looked up at her, his blue eyes serious. For this child, absolutely. For the lack of sleep and midnight feedings, probably not. His expression softened. But we'll figure it out together, just like we have everything else. She leaned down to kiss him, marveling at how this man, once so self-contained and solitary, had blossomed into an openly affectionate husband and expectant father. The tragedy that had marked his earlier life would always be part of him, but it no longer defined him. I love you, Nathan Quinn, she said simply. And I love you, Madeline Quinn, he replied, his voice holding all the certainty and commitment that had characterized their relationship from the start. Their moment was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching riders. Nathan stood, instantly alert, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol he still wore out of habit. Expecting anyone? Madeline asked, also rising to her feet despite her unwieldy shape. No, he replied, squinting at the dust cloud on the horizon. Stay here. But as the riders drew closer, tension gave way to surprise and then pleasure. "It's Sheriff Miller," Nathan announced. "And Marcus from the telegraph office. Looks like a social call." Indeed, the two men approached at a leisurely pace, raising their hands in friendly greeting as they neared the cabin. "Quinn, Mrs. Quinn," Sheriff Miller called, doffing his hat to Madeline as they dismounted. "Hope we're not intruding." "Not at all," Nathan assured them, shaking hands with both men. "What brings you out this way?" Marcus stepped forward, a leather satchel in his hands. "Special delivery," he explained. "Too important to trust to the regular mail." He withdrew an official-looking envelope bearing the seal of the territorial governor and handed it to Nathan. "Came through my office this morning with instructions for immediate delivery." Puzzled, Nathan broke the seal and unfolded the document inside. His eyes widened as he then reread the contents. "What is it?" Madeline asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Nathan looked up, a mixture of disbelief and pride on his face. "It's a commendation," he said slowly, "from the governor himself, for our role in uncovering the silver theft and bringing Thornton and Hollister to justice." "Not just a commendation," Sheriff Miller corrected with a broad smile. "There's a reward. The territorial government is mighty grateful for the recovery of all that tax revenue." Madeline took the document from Nathan's hands, scanning it quickly. The amount listed made her gasp. "This is substantial," she managed. 5% of the recovered funds," Marcus nodded. "Standard for this type of situation." "The governor thought you might have plans for it, what with the little one on the way." Nathan seemed at a loss for words, so Madeline answered for both of them. "Please convey our thanks to the governor. This is most unexpected." After the visitors had departed, promising to return for a proper celebration once the baby arrived, Nathan and Madeline sat on the porch swing, the official document between them. "What should we do with it?" Nathan asked, still somewhat stunned by the windfall. "It's enough to buy more land, expand the herd significantly." Madeline considered for a moment. "We could do that," she agreed. Or, he prompted when she hesitated. "I was thinking about Eliza," she said quietly, "the girl who died in my place. She had a younger sister in an orphanage back east. She was saving to bring her west." Understanding dawned in Nathan's eyes. "You want to use the money to help her sister?" "Some of it," Madeline nodded. "Maybe establish a fund for education or apprenticeships for orphan girls. Something good should come from Eliza's death." Nathan took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Eliza would be proud." "And the rest," Madeline continued, warming to the subject, "we could use to build a proper school here. Superior is growing. There are more families arriving every month. Children need education." "A school," Nathan repeated thoughtfully. "With a real teacher. Someone like you, perhaps." Madeline smiled at the suggestion. "Perhaps eventually, after our own little scholar is a bit older." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western horizon, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. "It's funny," Madeline said finally. "When I came west, I was just looking for escape, a quiet place to disappear. Instead, I found everything I never knew I wanted, including a husband who breaks windows," Nathan teased. "Especially him," she confirmed, leaning against his shoulder. "Every last one until he found me." Nathan's arm tightened around her, his hand coming to rest on her rounded belly where their child continued its restless movement. "Best thing I ever did," he said simply. As twilight settled over their ranch, bringing with it the peaceful sounds of nightfall in the desert, Nathan and Madeline Quinn contemplated their future not with fear or uncertainty, but with the quiet confidence of two people who had faced the worst together and emerged stronger for it. The fire that had nearly claimed Madeline's life had instead forged an unbreakable bond between them, one that would continue to grow and strengthen with the imminent arrival of their child and all the adventures that lay ahead. In the end, it wasn't the dangers they had faced or the enemies they had overcome that defined their story. It was the simple, profound truth that sometimes love appears in the most unexpected moments, even through a broken window. Amid smoke and flames, and once found, becomes the foundation upon which a life of joy and purpose can be built. For Nathan and Madeline Quinn, that foundation was stronger than any adversity, brighter than any fire, and more enduring than all the silver in the Arizona territory.